and welcome into Tech Tuesdays, brought to you by Multiverse Videos. Today I thought I'd do something a little bit interesting, and we're going to take a look and see if macOS 10 Snow Leopard version 10.6 is still as useful today as it was back when it first came out. Or more specifically, is a Core Duo-based Macintosh still useful in today's world? Let's get started.
So, I had to get a laptop. I looked on my laptop shelf, and really the only pliable choice was this first generation MacBook Pro. The specs on it are as follows. It's a 1.83 GHz Core Duo with its max 2 GB of RAM with an 80 gig hard disk running Snow Leopard.
So what I thought I'd do is I would run a series of tests and see if this old '06 MacBook Pro is still as useful today as it was in 2006, or as that matter, if it's still as useful as a modern MacBook Pro running a more modern version of OS X like El Capitan or something along those lines. So let's get started.
First things first, I connected my Apple Magic Mouse with the built-in Bluetooth on the MacBook Pro. For web browsers, we're going to start with Safari. This is Safari 5.1.10, released in September of 2013. This is the last version to support Snow Leopard. As you see, the Apple homepage loads and renders just fine. The Microsoft website also loads and renders just fine as well. Facebook was a bit more interesting in the fact that while the load speed really wasn't bad, the rendering really was the big disadvantage here. Safari failed to render any of the image content. Next up, we're going to be testing Google Chrome 38, released in October of 2014. Chrome 38 was the very last version to support Macs with Core Duo processors. As you see, the Apple homepage loads pretty well. A little bit slow with loading, but the render speed is pretty good. Next, I decided to try out Blackboard, a website from my college. And the loading speed isn't too bad, a bit slow, but the render speed is pretty good. However, if you use Chrome 38, you'll constantly run into this Flash is blocked thing. This is because Google bundles Flash with all their browsers. However, after constantly clicking accept several times, I was able to get this Flash video to play from one of my local news stations. Because third-party Twitter clients on Snow Leopard are becoming scarce, I decided to log into TweetDeck on the web using Chrome, and it loads pretty well and works just fine. The only browser that is still supported on Snow Leopard 32 is Firefox 44. Firefox is the only modern browser that still supports Snow Leopard. As you see, the Apple homepage loads and renders just fine. And even Facebook loads and renders even faster than Chrome does, more than likely due to it being a more up-to-date browser. However, there is some UI lag when switching tabs. As you see, when I switch tabs, there is some UI animation lag. The newest version of iWork that'll run on Snow Leopard is iWork 09, which really isn't all that old. And as you see here, we're opening up Keynote, and it works just fine. The newest version of Microsoft Office that'll run on Snow Leopard is Office 2011. However, I have Office 2004 on here, basically just for nostalgia reasons. If you're a fan of OpenOffice, the newest version of OpenOffice doesn't support Core Duo machines, but you can go up to version 4.0.1. And as you see here in Word here, it works just fine as I type out this little document for you. The newest version of iLife that'll run on this machine is iLife 09, which is several years out of date, but I think for most people it should be just fine. Opening GarageBand really wasn't a problem. It took a second for it to load the loops, but after it loaded it was just fine. And I had a little fun in GarageBand here. I also opened iMovie for a quick test. In fact, this entire video was edited on this MacBook Pro using iMovie. Email worked just fine using OS X's built-in mail client. It even worked fine with my iCloud mail, which is a little interesting since Snow Leopard actually doesn't support iCloud at all. With OS 10.6.8, you do have the Mac App Store, but I'm not sure how useful this actually is since I'm not sure how many apps on the App Store still support Snow Leopard. I decided to try a network file share. As you see in the sidebar, the MacBook Pro is able to see my main MacBook Pro, which is actually running OS X El Capitan. I'm going to enter in my credentials and log in. I am given a list of volumes to mount. I'm going to go ahead and click on my personal folder, and as you notice when I do that, it mounts directly on the desktop. For the next test, I decided to see if the machine could play a video coming off my main MacBook Pro over the server. We're going to see if we can sync and charge my iPad mini. It was able to charge it, but it won't sync to iTunes. Apparently the iTunes version is too old for iOS 9.
However, there actually is one advantage to Snow Leopard and Core Duo based Macs, and that is Rosetta! Rosetta is a PowerPC emulator that Apple shipped on Intel-based Macs, and the whole point of Rosetta was to allow you to run PowerPC-based applications on Intel hardware. And Apple released this as a way to ease the transition from PowerPC to Intel processors, and Snow Leopard was the very last version of OS X to support Rosetta, which means that ever since 10.7 Lion, PowerPC applications are no longer supported on Macs, meaning they don't open. But if you still have Snow Leopard, you can still open them on your Snow Leopard-based Mac.
This basically means you can run all of those classic PowerPC games or apps. In this case, I'm using AppleWorks, and it works just fine. Unfortunately, this MacBook Pro has a busted DVD drive. When you insert a DVD, nothing happens and the disc ultimately gets spit back out. But never fear, we have backup method number 2, and that is the old USB optical drive. I plugged it into my hub, and I inserted the disc, and as soon as I closed the disc mounted on the desktop.
So what is my final judgment on the matter? Well, as you see, I've been editing the video over here on iMovie for a little bit, and I thought I'd go ahead and create this little wrap-up. I would say they're not completely obsolete yet. They're starting to become obsolete due to the fact that Snow Leopard is starting to, newer applications have not supported Snow Leopard in quite some time. I would say they're still practical in some ways. Probably not useful as a daily machine, but I would use, actually this 06 MacBook Pro is actually my backup machine, and I also use it as a traveling computer. So if I ever go anywhere on vacation, I leave my main MacBook Pro home, and I take this with me because it does everything I need it to do. I think what's becoming an issue with the Core Duo machines is because of their lack of 64-bit support. A lot of web browsers are not being supported on them, and like I documented in the video, only Firefox is supported on it now, and I don't know how much longer that's going to last. You can still get by, if you don't mind using some out-of-date applications and you don't mind having the the latest and greatest stuff. You can pick up a Core Duo based Mac, a MacBook or MacBook Pro. You can pick them up relatively cheaply. You can pick them up for about 120 some bucks. This is an 06 MacBook Pro, and I think I only paid like $100 for this thing. They will ultimately become more obsolete as time marches on, but as they say, technology marches on. I think as maybe a first computer for somebody, I don't think it would be all that bad, or as a traveling computer, I don't think it would be all that bad. this wasn't really a proper test, but I have used this before, and it's not all that bad. Again, some things are slower than, it's not as fast as a modern Mac. But I don't know, maybe if you toss in a nice SSD in there, maybe that'll help the speed a little bit. But I think the biggest drawback that's affecting the Core Duo based Macs is definitely web browsers. This will ultimately get worse as time marches on. I just hope that maybe somebody, maybe who's smarter than me, could create a project, sort of like how 10.4 Fox is a project for older Macs like PowerBooks and iBooks, to bring a more up-to-date browser to those browsers, to those computers, and maybe somebody will do the same for Core Duo based Macs. I don't know. That would be kind of nice if somebody would do that. That'll breathe a little bit of life back into these things. But these things are still useful for some tasks. I wouldn't use I wouldn't use a Core Duo based Mac as a daily machine in today's day and age. But they're still useful for some things. Anyway, if you liked the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up if you liked it. If you want to see more from Multiverse videos, make sure you click the subscribe button down below. New videos from me every Tuesday. And check out my main channel if you'd like, the Techies World. A link for that will also be in the description. Thank you guys for watching.